For generations, the tobacco industry has tried to convince millions of people that smoking is cool, sexy, and completely harmless. And they've done a good job, for every day we smoke billions of cigarettes, year in and year out. In fact, it's one of the most successful advertising campaigns in history, and one in which seduction, suppression, and the distortion of facts have been a crucial element. Because for more than 50 years it's been a well-known fact that smoking causes cancer, and despite the fall in tobacco consumption in developed countries, the global consumption of tobacco continues to rise. Smoking is still one of the most frequent causes of death in the world, and the number of people who die due to smoking is now over 4 million a year. The epidemic, as the World Health Organization calls it, will apparently never end.
What a comfort a smoke can be. Some artists find they can't paint without a puff. The film star would be lost without the added glamour of a cigarette. Today, we're only too pleased to be able to do this. We present the family model. When father says puff, we all puff.
Cigarettes have always been linked with relaxation and enjoyment, in the beginning only for a few exclusive groups. But in the 20th century, mass production and modern marketing made cigarettes available to the masses.
Before the development of the cigarette manufacturing machine, it was very expensive to make cigarettes, so very few people could afford them. And with the development of a machine that would make cigarettes, it brought the cost way down. The second important development was the development of safety matches, so people could light the cigarettes. And the third, and probably the most important one, was the development of modern advertising and public relations, which occurred in the 1910s. And the first really big push for cigarettes came in World War I, where the tobacco companies arranged for the troops to get free cigarettes.
During World War I, cigarettes were included in soldiers' rations, and one European and American military company after another smoked their first cigarettes in the dismal trenches.
LSMFT. Lucky Strike means fine tobacco.
When the war ended, millions of young men were regular consumers of tobacco, and with the persuasive help of massive marketing, the decade between 1910 and 1920 saw the consumption of cigarettes in the US alone rise sixfold.
The tobacco industry pioneered many of the techniques that we now celebrate in mass marketing. 1923, Lucky Strike means fine tobacco was spelled out in enormous letters over Times Square. And that's the first time that was ever used. Tobacco was then later pioneered in radio and mass distribution magazines, women's magazines, sports magazines.
The tobacco industry was soon to realize that women too were a huge potential market, even though only a small number of women smoked in the 1920s, for the moral of the times dictated that women should not indulge. But with a sure sense of the times, the tobacco industry launched a creative marketing campaign.
One day, Mr. George Hill, president of the American Tobacco Company, called me in and said, "We're losing half of our market." And I said, "Why, Mr. Hill?" He said, "There's a taboo by men that does not permit women to smoke. What can we do about breaking down that taboo?"
Advertising agent Edward Bernays contacted some female acquaintances and convinced them to march in the Easter parade, smoking what he launched as torches of freedom.
Next morning, there wasn't a newspaper in the United States, even the New York Times had a front page story, "Debutantes light torches of freedom to protest man's inhumanity to women by a taboo against smoking."
The tobacco industry's advertisements appealed to many types of women: the sporty type, the racy type, and the woman with weight problems. "Reach for a Lucky instead of a Sweet," urged the manufacturer of Lucky Strike. In the 20s, the number of women smokers trebled, as did the production of cigarettes. The biggest breakthrough of the century for the cigarette industry, however, came during World War II.
The Overseas League organized a tobacco fund quite early in the war to provide smokes for the services, and the first donor was His Majesty the King. Immediate help came from all over the world, particularly from the United States. In the first year, over 70 million cigarettes were thus sent out. Smokes are in camp and the boys feel as delighted as you do.
By the end of the war, 4 out of 5 British men smoked. In the post-war era, the need for cigarettes created long queues outside tobacconists. Once again, the American tobacco industry came to the aid of cigarette-hungry Europeans.
A major part of the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe was free tobacco. So between 1945 and early 1950s, 90,000 tons of tobacco were sent free of charge to Germany. And $1 billion was spent on tobacco to be distributed free to the Europeans.
Whilst cigarettes were being smoked as never before, critics began to warn against them, for it was common knowledge that cigarettes caused throat irritation and coughing. But then, an increasing number of scientific studies indicated a far more serious effect of smoking.
Coffin nails. Yes, that's what cigarettes are, according to the Medical Research Council. We've all heard something of the kind before, yet almost everybody smokes, including thousands young enough to know better. And as smoking is nowadays allowed nearly everywhere, it's on the increase year after year. So is lung cancer.
In the early 1950s, there were several very important complementary studies that were done. Sir Richard Dawell did his very large epidemiological study showing that British doctors who smoked got lung cancer a lot more than British doctors who didn't smoke. At the same time, Ernst Winder here in the United States did experiments where they painted mice with tobacco tar and got cancer. And those two facts coming together attracted a huge amount of public interest.
The Reader's Digest, which is published in many different languages and is one of the most widely read magazines, wrote about the convincing studies, and the rest of the press followed suit in what was to be the worst crisis yet for the tobacco industry, as tobacco sales fell for the first time, as did stock by 10%.
With most products, if you find a tainted product, people bottled water or aspirin or something, that whether it's tainted, the manufacturer just pulls it off the market and fixes the problem. Well, that wasn't how the tobacco companies responded. There was a very famous secret meeting in late 1953 at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, where the leaders of all the big tobacco companies got together with their lawyers and of the public relations firm of Hill and Knowlton, and came up with a brilliant strategy of quote, creating controversy.
Said the boss to his senior VP,
I want you to listen to me. I mean it, no joke. This Newport's a smoke with a smooth taste. I know you'll agree.
oh, smoother Newport.
According to this nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.